Okay, welcome everybody. And my name is Donagh Berry, and I'd like to welcome you to the 15th session of the Teagasc Research Insights. And the goal of this is to focus on addressing the challenges and opportunities in the agri-food sector, and in doing so, showcasing Teagasc's research. So today, we have a very topical discussion on, if you just look at AgriLand this morning, about the amount of dairy beef that's going through the marts at the moment. Also, we'll soon be entering our breeding season from a dairy perspective. So it's really timely that we're going to have this discussion today on dairy beef. And to take us on that journey, we have three excellent researchers, a mixture of both youth and, for Padraig's sake, I guess we can call it more maturity. But we have, from the youth perspective, we have Alan Twomey and Nicky Byrne, who are two recent hires at Teagasc, specifically focused on dairy beef. Really exciting researchers, and I would say ones to watch out for, because I think that some of the stuff that they're doing is really, really good and really important in the future. Just to let you know, this seminar is being recorded and it will be available on the website afterwards. Also, if you look at the bottom of your screens, you will see that there's a Q&A option. So during the talks, anytime at all, just write some questions into that Q&A, and at the end of the three speakers, we'd have an opportunity to have some discussion, and I will be relaying those questions to the guys. Anything that's not answered today will also be answered on the website. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, is Alan Twomey. He's a geneticist based in Moore Park, particularly focusing on dairy beef. And Alan, if you can put up your slides, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Donagh. So as Donagh alluded to, I will speak to you today on dairy beef index. And this was a breeding tool that was launched in 2019 for selecting beef sires for your dairy herd. So briefly, I'll just describe on how genetics works for beef sires for your dairy herd. And I'll go why it is important and who this tool should be used by, whether it's dairy farmers, breeders, or calf rearers. And finally, I'll just give a brief overview on a bit of research that was done by Teagasc on how this dairy beef index has provided more profit will provide more profit to the beef rearers and the dairy farmer. So firstly, a bit of a background on beef cross dairy, and I suppose most of this is coming from our growing dairy herd. And from 2011, there's almost 500,000 extra cows in Ireland, dairy cows. And this is mainly due to the quota abolishment in 2015, where it allowed an increased expansion. And couple that with improved fertilities and new technologies such as sex semen, this has increased the use of beef on the dairy herd. So when I say improved fertility, cows are lasting longer in our herd due to intensive selection on fertility traits and improved management. And as cows survive longer in the dairy herd, there is less need to breed replacements. So more opportunity to use beef in your dairy herd and to improve beef coming from the dairy herd, and also adding more value for the dairy farmer. And this is similar with sex semen, that less dairy semen will be used on dairy cows with the increased uptake and improvements in sex semen technologies. And I suppose all this is to improve a calf that's a value to the beef farmer. I suppose this is important to ensure there's a sustainable beef sector, because a sustainable beef sector ensures that there is also a sustainable dairy sector, and that we often look at this calf coming from the dairy herd as a byproduct, but this byproduct should be a prime animal for the beef area, that a beef farmer can take this calf from the dairy herd and make a sustainable profit from their system from this calf. And Nicky will speak more on the differences on the growing dairy herd in his presentation. So I suppose there's often a conflict between the dairy farmer and the beef farmer, and what the dairy farmer and the beef farmer wants. So we'll just take what the dairy farmer is looking for. And he's really focusing on, when he's selecting his beef bulls, he wants a bull that will provide easy calving. And easy calving to him is really that he doesn't have to assist the cow. So this is easier management. A cow with an easier calving, it also has better health and fertility and is more likely to cycle earlier. And also on top of that is gestation length. And gestation length is important to the dairy farmer because the shorter that cow carries in gestation, the earlier that cow will start lactating and have a longer and will produce more milk in the lactation. And this is particularly important for beef bulls because beef bulls are usually used later in the breeding season in dairy herds, and they ensure that the dairy farmer can have a tight, compact calving season. Therefore, gestation length is utmost important in these beef bulls. But totally on the other side, the dairy farmer has a totally different mindset what his calf should be. He wants a calf that will have a high carcass weight and with good primal cuts. Then when I say primal cuts, that's your conformation score that's graded in the factory. And this is a visual inspection of the carcass based on the meat cuts and the meat yield that the animal will have for sale. But I suppose these two conflicting interests, can they really be brought into one? Can we really solve both their problems in one? And I suppose there is, and what this presentation is about, is getting those sires that achieve both. And that's easy calving and short gestation to suit the dairy farmer. And for the beef farmer, that they have a good carcass merit and provides a profitability for that beef farmer. And this led to the adoption or the introduction of the Dairy Beef Index. And the Dairy Beef Index does exactly what these two want. It identifies those sires that have easy calving with good beef traits. And I suppose I just show here on the right hand side, there just shows the breakdown of what actually goes into the Dairy Beef Index. And all these traits are included based on their economic weight. So traits that are of economic importance to both the dairy farmer and the beef farmer. And we can see it's broken down in two, where you have your beef there in your blue and your dairy in green. And for your dairy, you have traits such as calving difficulty and gestation length, as I already spoke about, and also calf mortality. And then on the beef side, you have your carcass weight and carcass conformation, as well as your spec traits. And when we say our spec traits here, this is the specs that the factory guidelines have. So for conformation, factories pay a bonus for conformation scores of greater O equals or greater. And then on the carcass weight, they're looking for a carcass between 270 and 380 kilos. And as well as this and other traits and more difficult to measure traits, we have feed intake, which is to drive efficiency on beef herds. And also there is a docility and pollenness in the index. And I suppose this is readily available to all herd owners to identify beef bulls, or for pedigree farmers to breed the next generation. So it's available on all bulls and also available on beef females. And you can find this information on the ICBF website, and that is on using their animal search, or on the active bull list, which I've just shown here on the right. And what I can just show here and highlight on the right, and this is the active bull list, and just the column there with the DBI. And all the DBI is done on an economic basis, similar as all our other breeding indexes that farmers are probably more aware of, such as your EBI or your replacement index. And this is the exact same. It's an economic figure. So the animal with the higher economic figure is going to provide more profit to both the dairy farmer and the beef farmer. So comparing a bull of 140 euro compared to a bull with 100 euro DBI, that we expect that the bull with 140 euro on average will produce, provide 40 euro more revenue to both the dairy and the beef farmer. But I suppose the big challenge here, and what the Dairy Beef Index is trying to break, is is this relationship between carcass and calving. And it's very similar to what we've seen in the dairy, is where you have this negative relationship between fertility and milk. And when you select for one, you're going to have deteriorate the other. So we're just showing here that as we select for a higher carcass weight, there's also, you're going to increase calving difficulty. And yes, this will suit your beef rearer, but will have a negative impact on the dairy farmer. And vice versa, the exact same. When we can select intensively on calving difficulty, you're going to end up with a smaller carcass. And I suppose just showing this, and this is just showing this is a plot of bulls, a plot of Angus bulls, and this is plotting their calving difficulty on the bottom axis compared to the carcass weight on the left axis. And every dot here represents an Angus bull, and all these Angus bulls are NAI with a reliability of 70% or more. And I suppose as we can see that as calving difficulty increases, your carcass weight increases, and vice versa, as we select for more lower calving difficulty, you get a lower carcass weight on average. But there's some of these bulls fall into this top left-hand category, and these are the bulls that we really want to identify. These are bulls with easy calving and high carcass weight. And as we can see here, I just highlight the dots here in yellow. These are the Angus bulls that are in the top 20% on the dairy beef index. And the majority of these bulls are falling into that top left-hand corner that have a good carcass weight and also have a good calving difficulty. Now, some may say that, yes, there's some of these yellow dots outside of that top left-hand corner, but we must not forget that the dairy beef index has multiple traits, as I had previously described, such as maybe gestation length and conformation score. So some of these bulls that are in that top left-hand corner may be really good on other traits that are also of economic importance. So I suppose next up is kind of that is the calving difficulty. And I suppose many of us and dairy farmers look at breed when we're talking about calving difficulty, and it's using Angus usually is the go-to bull, or even a Hereford. It's just because they're easier calving. And this slide here just shows the distribution of the calving difficulty of the Angus breed, which is in the red line, and the distribution of the Hereford breed in the blue line. And we can see, yes, on average, these are relatively easy calving, but there's some of these bulls that there's still a wide spread of calving difficulty even within these breeds. And I suppose even if you just pick totally on breed and just compare Angus versus the Hereford, that if you, on 20% of the time, your Angus bull will be harder calving than your Hereford. And then we just look at some other breeds here, and everyone would assume that your Angus bull is always going to be easier maybe than your Limousin or your Simmental. But here, this graph just shows, and that's the distribution of your Limousin and your Simmental in your purple and black line, is that there's 13% probability that your Angus bull will actually be harder calving than your Limousin. So this mindset that we just use an Angus that's going to be easy calving does not always be true. And I suppose this is another tool what the dairy beef index does. It doesn't select within breeds. It allows us to select across breeds. And I suppose finally, and everyone would expect the Angus to be easier calving than the Belgian Blue, but there's actually a 2% probability that your Angus is going to be a harder calving than your Belgian Blue. I suppose more importantly, and most will say 2% probability is really small, and you would be right. But I suppose on the flip side, that the Belgian Blues, that some dairy farmers might never use a Belgian Blue because they're really hard calving, but there's also Belgian Blues that are really easy calving. And these are the ones that we should be trying to use to improve your beef merit, but also not have a negative impact on our calving difficulty within the dairy herd. So I suppose the dairy beef index, or the DBI, is probably better known as, is often who should use it. And I suppose it's always the dairy farmer should use this tool to select their beef or their beef bulls. But I suppose first and foremost, bull breeders, because this is where the improvements are going to be seen, is bull breeders have to produce these beef bulls with a high dairy beef index so they're available to dairy farmers. So bull breeders should be using high dairy beef index bulls on their females with a high dairy beef index. So they can have a market going to the dairy herd, as I showed in the first slide and Nicky will show forward. This is where there's a growing market, is these dairy cows are increasing, so there'll be an increased market going for beef bulls for the dairy herd. And these beef bulls then will, I suppose, the best of them will go into AI stations, and the AI stations will select these on the dairy beef index. And then that will also feed down into dairy farmers, and dairy farmers should be selecting stock bulls. And I know the pedigree sales are on at these current days, and they should be at the pedigree sales looking for, when they're buying their stock bulls, they should be looking at the dairy beef index. And they should be trying to pick bulls with a high dairy beef index that suits their system. And then additionally, when they're using their beef in the AI, and I said that most of this beef is later in the season, but it's important now that improve fertility, that there's some, the dairy farmers try to use beef AI even on cows that come in early in the breeding season. So try to use the cows that you don't like, cows that are with a poor EBI or cows with a poor milk yield. Try to use a high dairy beef index bull on these cows, even if they come in early in the breeding season through AI. And I suppose finally, is the dairy beef rearer, and they often find, I suppose, that they don't have a choice in any of this, that all this, it's what comes from the dairy herd is kind of what's left to them and what they have to take. But I think they have to be proactive on this as well, and they have to demand these higher dairy beef index bulls from the dairy farmer, and to ensure, and dairy farmer, if there's a demand from, and they'll have to buy into the dairy beef index then, and this will feed back into AI stations and bull breeder, and it will, so the dairy beef rearer has a big impact on the improvements in the dairy beef index. And I suppose as well as that, they should be in discussions with the dairy farmers that have, if dairy beef rearers are buying calves and their dairy farmers every year, they should try and have a relationship with these dairy farmers and pick these beef bulls together, so the beef bull suits both the dairy farmer and the beef farmer. And I suppose this is my slide. My final part will be, is this actually working? And I gave a lot of stats here and I showed how great the dairy beef index, but it is actually working in the field. And I suppose I took two groups of bulls, and one was the top 20% on the calving trait. So these were bulls that were really good on your calving difficulty and gestation length. And this is where most of the focus was on beef bulls prior to the introduction to the dairy beef index. And then I took another group of bulls, and these are the bulls that are top 20% on the dairy beef index. So these are the group of bulls that we would hope that will be selected going forward in the future if their dairy farmers select on the dairy beef index. And I just followed their progeny, and if they were both used on a similar cow type. And we just firstly here look at calving difficulty. And I suppose that the beef bulls were really good in calving traits, were really good in calving difficulty in the ground. Only 1% of their progeny had a calving difficulty, and at a 283 days gestation on average. But on the other side, the dairy beef and the bulls that were picked on the dairy beef index, yes, they had a slightly higher calving difficulty in gestation length, but this was only 1% and 1 day respectively. And in the bigger scheme, so this is a really biologically small difference between the two bulls. But where the big difference we can see is on carcass merit. And I suppose your bulls that were selected based on calving traits had an inferior carcass compared to the bulls selected on the dairy beef index. Now, I suppose it was a 9 kilo increase in carcass weight. There was a similar conformation score. All those bulls and the dairy beef index on average did get an O+ grade more times than your easy calving bulls. And then there was a 4% unit increase in animals reaching carcass specification. And I mentioned those carcass specification earlier. That's carcass weight and carcass conformation. Although this difference is really small than many people would see, this actually contributes to about €800 extra revenue to the beef farmer if they have about 20 progeny or 20 calves a year. And I suppose finally, to summarize, this dairy beef index is a breeding index, and it allows dairy farmers to select beef sires. And as is shown, it produces progeny with a higher carcass performance and has little or no impact on calving traits. And I suppose the most important thing for the dairy farmer and the beef farmer is that a sustainable beef sector is needed to ensure that there's a sustainable dairy sector going forward. And thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions at the end.
Great, thanks, Alan. So Alan has given us a quick run through from a genetic perspective, and now we have Nicky Byrne, a production scientist from Grange, is going to take us through the systems and how they interact with the genotype. So Nicky, if you can share your screen, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks very much, Donagh, for the introduction. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about optimum dairy beef production systems. Just what are some of the key ingredients of these systems? And then we'll look at some of the performance that's been achieved from a very much optimized system here on the dairy calf to beef research herd at Teagasc Grange. And I suppose just to begin and continue on from where Alan left off, you know, we know that we're now approaching 1.5 million dairy calvings on an annual basis, and this has grown, massively over the last number of years. And from those 1.5 million calvings, we generate 400,000 purebred dairy male animals. However, we know that these animals are of a lower level of terminal performance in comparison to our beef cross animals. Those 400,000 are in contrast to our 750,000 beef cross dairy animals. And those first cross beef animals from the dairy herd, you know, they can offer us higher levels of carcass performance and probably do suit our grass-based systems somewhat better than our purebred dairy males. So combined, that leaves us with about 1.1 million animals available for beef production in Ireland from the dairy herd on an annual basis. And if we look at the breakdown of those 1.1 million, we know that a third of those are finished on the farms that they're bred on, so they're very much integrated type dairy beef systems. Another third are exported or lost through mortalities, difficult calvings, etc. And the final third are traded farm to farm and enter into our dairy calf to beef rearing herds. And that's what we probably focus on for much of today's discussion. And I suppose when we look at those herds in terms of the numbers, we know that annually over 10,000 farms go out and purchase calves and rear them. But they're relatively small enterprises and probably accompany another on-farm enterprise such as sucklers or sheep or tillage. And those farmers, we see that they're purchasing on average 37 calves per farm per year. So it's not a massive number, and there probably is scope to increase the number of calves. But I suppose in an interesting exercise carried out by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation recently, you know, they saw that there was a very high attrition rate in farms rearing calves year on year. And when they looked at it over a 5-year period, they found that only 39% of farmers continue to rear calves, you know, right throughout that 5-year period. And there was many reasons why farmers opted out of the system, and that's one of the big challenges that we have to overcome. And I suppose just looking at some of the reasons why they opted out, and often what you find is a combination of these issues is what farmers experience and may opt out of the system over time. And I suppose what some farmers have experienced is, you know, low carcass weights, low carcass conformation, and ultimately low carcass value from their dairy beef animals. And in some cases, you know, there can be health challenges on some of these farms, especially respiratory disease challenges. And I suppose a combination of those can, you know, add greatly to the cost of production, reduce animal performance, and really a combination of these factors can undermine the economic viability of dairy beef systems. So we have to be really conscious of that and ensure that we've really good genetic animals that are capable of delivering in terms of carcass conformation and weight, that we've very high health status and maintain that health to achieve high levels of animal performance and maintain low cost of production which are achievable in dairy beef systems. And I suppose when we look at our Alan discussed the conflict that's there between the dairy traits and beef traits, and what that can mean to dairy beef animals. And I suppose we've been really, really good at developing a cow to suit our grass-based dairy production systems, and we have to do the same in dairy beef. And I suppose if we look at the cow of today, you know, she's very, very efficient in terms of her reproductive efficiencies, but we have seen a decline, especially in the carcass conformation. And if we look at the table on the screen, we can see across, you know, both Angus cross Holstein Friesian as well as the Holstein Friesian population, we can see a growing proportion of these animals on an annual basis are failing to meet the minimum carcass specifications for conformation. And that can greatly reduce our carcass value and undermine the economic viability of the system. And I think the sire choice on the dairy herd hasn't really been sufficient to counteract this negative trend in carcass conformation. So we know that we need to do more and put a more, maybe an extreme or a better outlier in terms of conformation on our dairy herd to counteract those negative dairy traits and improve the quality of the beef animal coming from our dairy herd. And just when we look at the system, there's lots of different factors that influence the type of systems that we implement on farm. And I suppose lots of these factors help and promote the implementation of dairy beef systems. And I suppose land is one of the big ones. The quality of the land, the ability of it to grow and utilize grazed grass, the labour situation on farms, the quality of that labour, the availability, and there's lots of external factors that will promote various systems. And we see a combination of these, you know, help and promote dairy beef systems, which are probably growing in recent years. But I suppose how we judge these systems may differ, and it should differ based on the most limiting resources that we have. And most often that is land. So we see our systems are judged based on their output per hectare or the margin achieved on a per hectare basis. But where land isn't the limiting factor, it may be labour, or if we're not constrained by stocking rate, you know, some farmers may opt to judge their system based on individual animal output or maybe output per labour unit employed. So really, how we judge our system and how we design our system is very much farm specific, and it must, you know, suit the natural resources available there on your farm. But I suppose one key element of all successful beef systems, and dairy beef systems are no different, is that they need to make maximum use of forage. So they really can be grass-based systems, utilising over their lifetime 80 to 90% of their total lifetime feed requirements coming from a forage source. And that forage source can support high output systems achieving anywhere up to 1,000 kilos of carcass output from a grass-based diet. And really, you know, grass-based dairy beef systems, you know, they produce a high quality, sustainable product. We know that they have a lower level of carbon emitted per kilo of produce. But especially when we look at our early maturing traditional breeds used on the dairy herd, they can deliver, you know, a very high quality product that can achieve optimum fat levels and carcass weights, 280 to 320 kilo carcasses quite easily from this type of system, and you know, do produce a very marketable and saleable product internationally into the highest value markets. And I suppose when we just look at some of these components brought together and look at how they're working on the Grange Dairy Beef Research Herd, which is very much an optimized environment in terms of the management. And within that, we're assessing the role of different genetics and how they can contribute to improved system performance. So with that said, the objective of the current study that we have in place is to assess the physical and financial performance of dairy beef calves sired by bulls of divergent genetic potential for carcass traits. So really some of those outliers that Alan discussed earlier, that's what we're interested to see. How can they further improve our grass-based production system? And we want to test those, and it's important to do so, to test those genetics on a complete farm basis and see what they contribute to overall farm performance. And the main breeds that we employ in this study, and the reasons we do so are that they're the main two breeds of dairy beef animals coming from the dairy herd, and they are the Holstein Friesian and Aberdeen Angus, and we've different strains within those Aberdeen Angus categories. And really, by looking at the Holstein Friesian, they give us a real a glimpse of the beef potential of our national dairy herd, and kind of can indicate the future direction that may take, because they're the most genetically elite animals that make up that Holstein Friesian group. So just looking at our system, as I said, it's a very much intensive grass-based system, and we're really, pressurizing and testing out these genetic strains within that optimum grass-based system. And what we've designed the system to be is an under 24-month steer beef production system, generally running a stocking rate of about 2.8 livestock units across the animal's lifetime. And half of all the animals that come onto the system were reared on 2 different milk feeding treatments. So half of the animals were reared in 4 litres fed fed twice a day, or 8 litres fed twice a day. And we looked at the effect of this milk feeding level on animals' total lifetime performance. And the 3 systems, or the 3 breed groups that we run on the farm, are high merit Aberdeen Angus. So these really represent the outliers that Alan identified earlier, and they still deliver on calving ease. They're easy calving, short gestation animals, but they're at the higher end of the scale in terms of carcass weight and carcass conformation. We have our Holstein Friesian group, which are by the top 4 EBI sires on the active bull list. So they are genetically elite dairy sires. And the 3rd group that we have are our lower merit Aberdeen Angus. So they're still easy calving, short gestation, but at the lower end of the scale in terms of carcass weight and carcass conformation. And they probably do represent, the majority of the Angus is used on the dairy herd, more so than the higher merit group. But I suppose forgetting about genetics, probably the most important component of this system is our grassland performance. And if we look at our grazing performance, we achieved a 260-day grazing season across all the groups, over which we grew 13.7 tonnes. And really, dairy beef systems are in a great position to enjoy an extended grazing season, because the demand is so low in the spring of the year when growth is just starting to take off. So we can really match our demand with our growth from the outset of the grazing season. And also the nature of the animals, they're much lighter, they're probably better grazers. We can get out earlier when ground conditions may not allow for some other heavier suckler cow systems or heavier beef cattle systems. So we really do have an advantage and really have to grasp that to achieve high levels of performance. And we really have to be conscious of the pre-grazing covers that we offer these animals. So throughout the year, we offer all our cattle groups pre-grazing herbage masses of 13 to 1600 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. And we allocate this grass every 48 hours or every 2nd day. And that allows us to get the most from the grass as well as the animal. And we make sure that each group of animals graze down to a post-grazing residual height of 4 centimeters. So really what our focus in the system is to grow lots of grass, but to grow grass of very, very high quality to support high levels of animal performance. And if we just look at our average daily gain across, each of our animals' lifetime, we've achieved very close to 0.9 of a kilo from that overall forage based diet. So that's very, very high levels of performance, but relatively low level of imported inputs. And really, silage is a key component of this system and allows us grow our animals during our winter periods, but it also helps us regulate and control our herd demand, which can fluctuate greatly. But there's no room for poor quality silage in this system. It's an expense on the system. So we have to ensure that we make high quality silage in excess of 75 DMD. And we do that by grazing and conditioning our swards late in the autumn or in early spring to just ensure that we grow, very leafy quality silage to allow for an early cut in the month of May. And I suppose just looking at the slaughter performance that we've achieved from the system over the last 2 years. And this is probably greatly attributed to our high levels of grassland performance. And if we look at the carcass performance that we achieved, we can see, quite similar levels of carcass weight across all the groups. We can see that both the Angus groups offered us a little injection of carcass conformation, coming up a grade better than our Holstein Friesians. And we can see that, similar levels of fat cover were achievable across the 3 breed groups. And really what we did achieve was national average performance. But we did this at 6 months younger across each of our respective breed categories. And that really is probably the most important finding from the study, that we can achieve, moderate levels of carcass performance, but we can do it at much younger. But there's also much room there to improve. And if we look at the high versus low merit Angus, we can see a slightly higher carcass weight, of kind of a 5.5 kilo weight advantage for our high merit animals, a slightly higher carcass conformation score. However, these individual traits weren't significantly different. But when we take in a combination of these traits, we saw that 8% more of our high merit animals achieved produced an on-spec carcass, and that resulted in a higher carcass value, or a higher price per kilo achieved for those high merit animals. And we'll see that come through on a system basis and what it means to the overall system performance. So just to compare really our Holstein Friesian versus our Angus genotype groups, and just to emphasize the importance of increasing that, or reducing that proportion of pure dairy males originating from the dairy herd in exchange for our first cross beef animal. And we can see that our Holstein Friesians on average were 1 month older at slaughter than our Angus animals. And that normally resulted in, an extra month of intensive finishing at the very end. And that led to them, creating a higher stocking rate from their system and producing an overall higher organic nitrogen load on the system at 224 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And because of that extended age at slaughter, we saw that these animals had a higher level of concentrate use over their lifetime, just coming in under 700 kilos, which is still very low, but not as low as what we can achieve with our beef cross animal. And if we look at it on a total lifetime basis, these animals forage made up 85% of their total lifetime feed requirements on a dry matter basis. So that is very, very much a high level of performance, and probably far exceeds any grass-based standards internationally. And if we look at our Angus genotypes, very
Nicky,
similar
Can you move on?
Yeah, a very similar difference between our 2 Angus groups. But Angus has achieved a lower age at slaughter over our Holstein Friesian. They had a lower level of concentrate input, coming in at about 550 kilograms of concentrate, and achieved 87% of their lifetime feed requirement from a forage source. And when we look at our 4 versus 8 litres, we saw that there was no effective milk feeding treatment on lifetime animal performance. And those 4 litre calves consumed 20 kilos less milk replacer. However, they did consume 25 kilos of concentrate more over that rearing phase, but it ultimately led to a saving of 33 euros per calf from our system. And when we look at our system, we can see that they were all high output systems, 960 to 976 kilos of carcass output, very high performance. And if we just look at the financial performance,
we don't have time, Nicky. Can you just finish up?
Yeah, we're just finishing there. So look, you can see there's a 200 advantage to our high merit Aberdeen Angus animal over our Holstein Friesian. So that just shows the importance of increasing the beef component on the dairy herd. So look, just to complement what Alan has said, there's a need for greater integration. Dairy beef systems can be high output forage-based system. There is the potential to reduce age at slaughter greatly. And although there was non-significant difference between our Angus groups, there was improvement in overall carcass performance with our high merit animal. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Nicky, thanks very much. Padraig, can you get your slides up as soon as possible? Just to remind people, there's questions at the bottom, the Q&A. Just please type in your questions and I relay them to the lads in a few minutes. So we'll be a little bit tight for time, so it's likely that we'll be able to answer all of the questions. But Padraig needs no introduction, so Padraig, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Donagh. Okay, so you heard there from Alan and Nicky. I suppose Alan.
All right, can you go up to display settings and just change that, please?
Sorry. Are you okay? Okay. Yeah, so as you heard from Alan and Nicky, I suppose Alan, firstly, on the genetic side of it and the potential that genetics has, and secondly, then from Nicky in terms of combining that genetics with the feed system. What I'm going to do is try and integrate the two of those together and look at what the genetics and the system can deliver for us, both in economically and I suppose more particularly from a carbon emission perspective. How can it help us to achieve the carbon emissions reductions that the agricultural sector has to deliver? Okay, if you go back to this slide that Nicky showed earlier, showing the distribution or the progeny from the dairy herd, and Nicky said we're going to have about 1.55 million dairy calvings this year. About 400,000 of those are male dairy calves and about 750,000 are beef cross dairy calves. And I'm going to focus predominantly on these beef cross dairy calves. And I suppose a few other things I want to say about it is that it is likely that we are going to have very significant growth in the availability of sex semen over the next number of years. That growth in sex semen is going to shift calves from this cohort of 400,000 male dairy calves over to more beef cross dairy calves. That's what's going to be the effect of this. Less of these calves, these pure dairy calves, and more of the beef cross dairy calves. We're also, I suppose, probably going to see a slowdown in the growth of the herd. Therefore, there'll be less requirement for replacement heifers. So again, more beef cross dairy calves. If we look at what has happened in terms of if we look at what has happened in terms of the growth in the dairy herd or the beef coming from the dairy herd over the last 10 years, we can see that the beef breeds, the two early maturing beef breeds have really taken off, and that is the Angus and the Hereford. You know, they were the two dominant ones, but all of the growth in beef from the dairy herd has come in these two breeds, the Hereford and the Angus breed, which are now contributing. Probably in 2021, you're going to be looking at somewhere around 550 to 600,000 of these calves born out of the 750,000 calves. So they are by far and away the dominant breeds used on the dairy herd, and there's no reason to see why that wouldn't continue. This graph shows how they've changed over the last 10 years, and you can look at the continental breeds, the Limousin, Belgian Blue, and Charlie, down at the bottom there, remaining relatively static. And so Nicky put up the figures that he had achieved from carcass weight from the calves that were killed in Grange in the calf to beef system there. And he showed figures between 300 and 310 kilogram of carcass. But if we look across the entire population of what's happening out in industry, what I have here is the carcass weight for calves less than 30 months of age that are killed over the last 10 years that have come from the dairy herd. And in general, the carcass weight has been relatively consistent, killed somewhere between 320, 330 kilograms of carcass. And you can read that there off the left axis. But the gray line up here on top, which you can read off the right axis, shows the age at slaughter in months, okay? And you can see consistently they're killing somewhere around 26 months. And this is, I suppose, the selection of only the cohort that are under 30 months of age at slaughter. Okay, so you see quite a high age of slaughter relative to where Nicky was achieving at about 21 months of age. So about 5 months longer to grow these animals to similar carcass weight. If we take out the cohort of, say, the Angus, so this is Angus steers only, and look at when they're being killed. And you can see that really there's very few of them being killed until they're about 24 months of age. You can read the percentage there off the y-axis on the left. And it's up until the real peak in kill happens actually when they're just coming up to 30 months of age. But you're looking at an average kill date of somewhere around 26.5 months. This is an early maturing animal, crossed from the dairy herd, okay, an Angus steer at about a 320, 330 kilogram carcass. You know, it's quite a low growth rate and quite a high age at slaughter. And I suppose that's what I'm going to focus on, the significant opportunity that's there for the industry to increase efficiency, reduce its environmental footprint, and also increase profitability for the beef farmers. So you said in 2021, the dairy herd will produce about 750,000 beef cross dairy calves. When they're carried through to slaughter, they'll produce about 250,000 tons of prime beef. Now, that is, I suppose, like this beef that's coming from the dairy herd, you know, it's okay, it may not be top confirmation beef, but quite a lot of it gets into the bonus territory of certified Angus, Hereford prime beef. Okay, so it sells into the prime market. But the sector, when you look at the carbon footprint of producing that beef, it's about 3 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, and you compare that to, you know, our total emissions from agriculture is about 20 million tons. So it's quite a significant amount of, quite a significant component, about 15% of our emissions. If you project forward into 2030 and we assume that there'll be significant uptake of sex semen, as a lot more of it becomes available over the next number of years, we would expect that the calf numbers, the dairy herd will plateau, and that there'll be only a focus on replacement of the dairy herd rather than growth, and fertility is consistently improving within the dairy herd. So we'd expect that there'll be in excess of 1 million calves coming from the dairy herd, beef cross dairy calves coming from the dairy herd and available for the beef farmers to produce beef out of. If they're carried through to beef, it will represent about 350,000 tons of prime beef. That, I suppose, is close on 80% of the total prime beef market at the moment. So it's going to be a very, very significant component of the beef industry. However, if, I suppose, we continue as is, in terms of our system of production and the genetics of the animals that we have, that will lead to about 4.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so quite a significant increase in emissions. Now, that can come about by a growth in the industry as a whole. So the industry growing beef output by about 100,000 tons, and therefore extra livestock, extra emissions from the sector, which is unsustainable relative to where we want to go to. On the other hand, if that extra 1.5 million tons comes from displacing other sources of beef, obviously the Frisian male calves will be displaced to an extent as we get more sex semen. And this system of production of these early maturing beef cattle has a lower carbon footprint per kilogram of beef. And if this sector displaces some of the suckler sector, you get a very significant reduction in carbon emissions, because the carbon emissions at the moment from these dairy cross male calves, dairy cross beef calves, is somewhere around 50 to 60% of that of the suckler herd. So you get a very significant reduction if this beef is displacing beef from the suckler herd. But I think the real opportunity for the sector to continue to grow output while reducing emissions will come from driving down this age of slaughter. As we can see, we are producing a lot of animals pushing up on 30 months of age, an average of 26.5 months. And in Nicky's study, we saw that these animals could be produced at 20, 21, 22 months of age. You know, a very significant reduction, and that would lead to a very significant reduction in emissions. I want to talk about a project that we've been working on for about 10 years now with ABP, the meat processor, ICBF, and Teagasc have been collaborating on it, focusing on testing young bulls for AI, for beef bulls for use on the dairy herd. This is the Gene Ireland Dairy Beef Collaboration. How this has worked is that every year ICBF worked with the AI companies to identify suitable bulls. They sourced these bulls from the AI companies. They distributed semen from these bulls to dairy farmers who were willing to use them. These are young test bulls. And in the last year or two have been focusing on the dairy beef index since that was being developed. And of the calves born, of about 4,000 calves that are born to these bulls every year, about 650 calves are procured by ABP and Teagasc. Okay, 250 of them are reared to beef by Teagasc in Johnstown Castle, and about 400 of them are reared on a specialist calf rearing farm owned or operated by ABP on the Carlow-Wexford border. And of those 400 cattle, about 150 of them then go up into the Tully, the ICBF centre in Tully and Kildare, where they're finished, where they can measure feed intake and efficiency. So it's a range of these sires, and we're testing between 15 and 20 sires every year, producing somewhere around 200 progeny from these sires, with some of them selected out for very intensive measurements. What I'm going to do is briefly summarize some of the results, and we have quite a number of years' results now at this stage. But I'm just pulling out the carcass performance from the Angus sires. Now, there's lots of different breeds have been evaluated here, but I suppose the predominant breed has been the Angus because it's the most widely used in the dairy herd. And I've just pulled out from within breed variation here and showing what the effect of sire has. And you can see a range of sires there down the left. They're just names of different bulls that have been used over the last 10 years. Some of you that are in the industry will recognize some of the names that are there. Some are still quite young, quite new bulls, okay? But you can see that at the same, on the same system, so the system is very similar to what Nicky described up in Grange, very grass focused, trying to always graze it at the right covers, making high quality silage and finishing the animals at a relatively young age. And you can see that carcass weight range there from just under 280 kilograms up to over 320 kilograms, okay? Quite a big range, even though animals were always selected to achieve a consistent fatness. Okay, so animals were slaughtered when they became fat, and for the progeny of some sires it was at 280 kilos, and at the other extreme it was at 320 kilos. Again, a range in conformation from some very well conformed animals that were achieving an R-, which is very good from the dairy herd, right down to some of them that are down closer to no equals or no minus, which is where they're getting close to that threshold where they take a very significant financial hit, where you have an O- in these group of animals because they lose out on quality assurance and on the breed bonus. If you look then in terms of the value, you can see, a range in value difference there of somewhere of the order of about 170 euros a head from top to bottom. But I suppose selecting the top sires versus the average, you're looking at somewhere around 60 to 70 euros per head. Okay. But I suppose the last column there on the right, I suppose, is one of the critical ones if we look at the age of slaughter. And again, I put it up there in months. It's somewhere close enough to 21 months as an age of slaughter, similar to what Nicky was achieving up in Grange. It's quite easily achievable with these animals, not a high concentrate system. It's a grass-based system, grass and high quality silage, and able to achieve respectable carcass weights, conformations, and fat scores at 20 to 22 months of age. So I suppose the next part of it then is, look, what impact will all this have on carbon emissions? Okay, so we can select animals for better growth rate, more efficient animals, and can we reduce, does that have an impact on their carbon emissions if we can slaughter them at a young age? So we worked with an international organization, Abacus Bio, which took the data from this ABP farm and also the Teagasc data and from the ICBF, where the data from the animals that went through Tully. And we're very much in this one focused on enteric methane rather than total emissions, okay? So this is the enteric methane emissions, which are the predominant emissions from agriculture. And we looked at what impact slaughtering these animals at a younger age and selecting better animals had on reducing these emissions. So I suppose firstly, if we look at comparing, I suppose, the emissions intensity from the different sires, okay? And this is kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram carcass weight. And when we look at within breed, okay, so we select animals from the progeny of the best and worst and from individual sires, we can see that breed we can reduce emissions by about 9%. Whereas if we focus across breed, okay, so within the entire range of breeds that were available, you're looking at about a 17% reduction, okay? And that's comparing the best versus the average. Obviously, if you compare the best versus the worst, you get a significantly bigger effect. But if we look at the system effect, okay, so we look at the gross emissions over the lifetime, and we can see there that on the system up on the ABP farm, they were producing at about 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in the lifetime of the animal, versus when they went through to slaughter. And this is what we modeled from where the average is happening at industry level, where the animals are carried through and slaughtered at 26.5 months, you're looking at about 3.5 tons. Okay, so a very significant difference in enteric methane emissions from that difference in age of slaughter, somewhere around a ton of carbon equivalent per animal. Okay. If we look at, I suppose, the entire agriculture sector, and we said we have emitting somewhere around 20 million tons, and we have a target at the moment to reduce it to 2030 by about 2.5 million tons. We have about 750,000 beef calves annually. That's what's coming, beef cross dairy calves, and we expect that will grow to in excess of 1 million by 2030. Okay. We know that a 1 month younger age of slaughter will reduce total carbon emissions by about 180 kilograms, approximately 6 kilograms of carbon per head per day. Okay, so if we scale that up to the number of animals that are involved here, it's worth about 135,000. That's from 1 month. So getting from 26.5 months down to about 25.5 months, 135,000 tons of carbon equivalent. By 2030, because of the growth numbers, that'll be almost 200,000 tons. Just from reducing age of slaughter by 1 month. So you can see the potential that is there.
Can you finish up, Padraig?
Yeah, I suppose I'll move on quickly, I suppose, where we saw the difference between, I suppose, what's happening nationally, and we look at combining the efficiency gains from earlier age of slaughter, and then adding on top of that, the improvement in genetics from increased selecting of better animals. You can see the higher carcass weight, and also a significant further reduction. So this is just combining the system effect and the genetic effect. Okay, so I suppose ultimately, I suppose what we want to do is combine the right genetics with the right system to have a more sustainable, I suppose, production system. We saw that by selecting the right animals, we can improve the output from the farmer by increasing both the carcass weight, the conformation, and therefore the value of the animal varied from top to bottom between 150 and 200 euros. We can slaughter animals younger, and we estimate the cost of carrying these animals at close to 60 euros per month, or about 190 a day, or 58 euros per month, potential reduction by slaughtering animals at a younger age. So that's a reduced cost of production. Also on the environmental side, we can see that the breed effect, about a 9% within breed by selecting the right animals, the best versus the average animals. But across systems, okay, by slaughtering animals younger, we can reduce methane emissions by about 1/3. You know, so if we combine those, there's the potential to deliver a reduction of about 1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is about 40% of the entire emissions target for agriculture. One of the things that really has to happen—
You have to finish up, Padraig.
Yeah, is we have to have a breeding goal for days to slaughter. We don't have it in our breeding goals at the moment. We need to increase it in our breeding goals because it'll reduce emissions and reduce costs. So I suppose in conclusion, Donagh, just to wrap it up, improve farm management, as Nicky showed, a better grazing, better quality silage will reduce age of slaughter. Teagasc is going to roll out a national dairy beef campaign shortly to achieve these goals, okay? To achieve this reduction in age at slaughter and improve grass management and improve animal health and reduce age of slaughter. We need to select better bulls that can breed animals for reduced age of slaughter, increased efficiency and increased profitability. And as I said, we need to urgently include age of slaughter in our breeding goals. Okay, thanks, Donagh.
Thanks, Padraig. So if Nicky and Alan could come off mute and show their pictures as well. Padraig, while you are there, and maybe also to Nicky, give us one thing other than breeding that lads could bring their average age down to what Nicky is seeing or what you're seeing on the ABT study. What's the one management thing? And Nicky, you're then after that.
Okay, I suppose the first thing, I think it's grassland management. I suppose getting a long grazing season and getting good quality grass in front of the animals over a long grazing season. I think that's the number one thing that's going to drive down cost. And after that, I think it's going to be silage quality. We need to improve the quality of silage that's put in front of these cattle at a young age. As Nicky said, there's no room in the calf to beef system for poor quality silage.
Nicky, anything different or the same?
Yeah, very similar to Padraig. But in terms of concentrate use, we need to get smarter where and when we use it over that animal's lifetime. We don't need to feed more, but we need to use it more strategically to complement our forage. And that's what we're looking at in a new study that we have ongoing.
Okay, great. I've been given permission to go a few minutes over. So if there is any questions, we do have a few, please put them into questions and I go through them. Alan, question here, Belgian blues, these easy calving Belgian blues, will they not increase your gestation length?
No, Donagh, it's actually the other way. So as you'd expect is an animal with a longer gestation will carry more time. That calf will be growing as gestation length increases. So you'd actually expect a harder calving as gestation length increases. So vice versa, when gestation length reduces, you would then expect an easier calving. So easier calving bulls, on average, not always, but on average, will have a shorter gestation than other bulls. And this is the same, and I'm actually doing a bit of work on it at the moment myself. And this is actually the same within breeds. And even within the Belgian blues, although the relationship is small, that in general, an easier calving bull will have a shorter gestation.
Great stuff. Padraig, when you reduce age at slaughter, what would be then the duration of the fattening period, and would this impact meat quality?
Okay, so firstly, I suppose when we reduce the age of slaughter, our fattening period in all these systems, both on the ABP farm and in Grange, is probably about 70 to 90 days. So it's quite, these animals, because they're early maturing, will start laying down fat at a relatively low carcass weight of around 300 kilos and quite quickly. So you need constant selection for slaughter. Okay, you need to be monitoring these animals as they come near slaughter, and you can, in terms of meat quality, I suppose, provided they're killed at a constant fatness, that you're not killing under fat animals, I think you'll actually improve the quality of the animals, in terms of the eating quality. But I think having consistent fatness ultimately is the important part of it.
Great stuff. Nicky, 13.7 tons of dry matter. What kind of chemical fertilizer, or how much were you using nitrogen, and how sustainable is that going forward, given reliance on chemical fertilizers?
Yeah, so I suppose we were very much in an optimized maximum grass situation. That's what we designed it to be, and tried to see the genetics to suit it. So we were spreading 250 kilograms of chemical nitrogen per hectare on that system, so the maximum level. And look, but we have identified, we do generate a surplus of forage, so there is scope to reduce our nitrogen inputs, to suit that system. But at the outset, we didn't know how much forage we're going to eat. We have poor information on the intake of these dairy beef cross animals, so we maximize what we could grow on our system, and that was through the use of 250 kilograms of nitrogen over a long grazing season. But there is scope, incorporate clovers into the system, massive scope to reduce that, and it should be reduced going forward.
Good stuff. I'd say we might throw this one, last question, to everybody. Really good question from Dermot Rowan, and Padraig, you can start it off. Like, everybody here is talking about age at slaughter by the sounds of things, but what are the timelines to reduce the age at slaughter? When could that be achieved, and will this meet the national requirements? Really good question, Dermot.
Yeah, it is. I suppose it's very easy to, I suppose, not very easy, but it's much easier to show that it can be done rather than achieving at national level. I think it is going to require an alignment from the policy and the KT organisations and the processing organisations coming together to incentivise this reduced age at slaughter. Teagasc are going to roll out a campaign to, I suppose, improve the efficiency of calf to beef systems. The big driver of that will be improving grassland management, improving health, improving silage quality, and ultimately all of those will help to achieve this reduced age at slaughter. I think we also need to change on the genetic side. We need this age at slaughter within our breeding goals, but I think the industry needs to set out targets to achieve it, interim targets to achieve this reduction in age at slaughter. But like Teagasc will have a big campaign on this over the next number of years. And I believe that we could very easily see 2 to 3 month reduction in age at slaughter over the next 10 years.
Alan, like Padraig talked about genetic evaluations for age of slaughter. I know you're working on that. Give us a 1 minute update, quick.
So currently I'm working on those breeding values for age of slaughter, and we can see that there is, let's say within breeds, there's there's about 40 days between an Angus and we'll say your Belgian Blues at a similar carcass weight. And then we'll say within cross populations that there's 100 days between your top 20% and your bottom 20% on age of slaughter. So there's large genetic improvement that can be made on age of slaughter. And I would say in the coming year or two, there will be an age of slaughter evaluation available.
Great, really progressive. And that answers the last question there about, is it breed dependent? There's as much variability within the breed as across the breed. So look, with that, apologies, poor chairmanship, I went over time, but thank you all for attending. And on your behalf, I'd also like to thank the presenters. And what you can see here, again, I doubt it'll be as good as today, but it'll be our next Insight session in 2 weeks' time on the 14th of April. It's going to be chaired by Mick and Mike Deneen, all the way from doing his PhD in the US, is going to give a talk on nutrition. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you.